All right. Looks like we've got a couple people in here. Well, good evening, guys. Glad to have you. Tonight's town hall discussion is going to be about no-fly zones, and just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So coming up, the FAA is going to be making decisions on what should be a no-fly zone. And just wanted to get the community's take on what should be a no-fly zone, and where we should be able to, where the community feels that should be unacceptable to fly, and a couple other questions. So right now, I believe in the FAA reauthorization, it calls out a couple different areas, and one of them is let's see, one of them is going to be stadiums when they're occupied. We've got utility like infrastructure, so that's going to be like power plants, water treatment facilities. Let's see, we've got
military posts.
Yep, military posts. That was a big recent one. We've got as well as the new one this time around is going to be amusement parks. So those are some of the big call outs. But what else should be a no-fly zone? What do you guys think that the FAA should call out and say you are not allowed to fly around here? And it's not about keeping us, from flying in certain areas. It's more about protecting civil infrastructure and making sure that people are safe. So what would be your thoughts on that?
I think jails and prisons are also included in that.
Yes, you are right. They are. I apologize for missing that. What else, guys? What are some areas that you feel like? Oh, we got some comments here. Construction zones? I didn't say construction zones, and I don't believe that construction zones are called out. Do you feel like those should be avoided? Those should be a no-fly zone?
They sure make for some good videos.
They absolutely do.
I think the other thing that's included in there too is any kind of an emergency response. I think there's some suggested, at least some suggested protection over area that has some sort of disaster or other kind of emergency response going on.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And a lot of times what will happen is the FAA will file notices to airmen and temporary flight restrictions over areas. So I know, like with the recent fires in California, those were big. There was a lot of TFRs, temporary flight restrictions, around Chico and the different areas that were on fire. And that's more to protect the firefighting efforts, because a lot of those, especially those those wildfires, they've got airplanes and helicopters that are dumping water on those areas, and that's definitely to protect those aircraft that are trying to respond to those emergencies.
If I remember right, don't they specifically call out the wildfire as a no-fly area unless you're part of the response team?
I believe so. I'd have to double check that real quick.
That's what I was
here. Go ahead.
That's what I was getting at too, and I think that I think included in that, and I think the response time to get a TFR up, given something small like say a major car accident. So I don't know what I'm in the Midwest, so we've had like a couple of major 20+ car pileups and that sort of thing. in the area. And so you've got a lot of emergency response going on there. They may be using UAVs, and so they want to keep those areas clear as well, you know.
Absolutely. I'm gonna pull up this real quick. Give me 1 second to get to the appropriate section here.
How about open air concerts? So something out non stadia, but
I think that would fall under crowds of people or other. Yeah, I'd agree. You
Yep.
wouldn't want to fly over that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Yeah, a big gathering of people, I think, is just to be avoided.
Yep. Yep.
I would say any kind of huge gathering. Yeah. I mean, you've got massive events like marathons and outdoor concerts and even like fundraising events like breast cancer walks. I know a big one out here is like the Pat Tillman Run, that kind of thing. I have seen lots of videos on fireworks. I haven't seen anything about firework displays, but that could definitely be something.
Yeah, the fireworks are
Definitely
interesting because I would
yeah.
think, for the most part, people aren't that close to them. So if you're flying through them, you're not really flying over people because they're not launching them over people.
Right.
Where I am, they launch them pretty close to people. I know they. I'm fairly near Milwaukee, and they issue a TFR around that area at the lakefront where they do their launch there. Last year, anyway.
All right. So I know a lot of times cities will give permits, and a couple of times I've seen evidence of FAA granting permits for operations during large events like that. But a lot of time you have to prove that you're not going to be flying over the people, that you're going to be, kind of removed from it. Should there be some type of zone restriction for that? Just not over people at all? Or should those be completely off limits? What are your thoughts on that? Anybody?
Personally, I like those videos, so I'd hate to see that be restricted too much, as long as everybody's doing it safely somehow.
Okay.
And the FAA is documenting heavily flight over people plus flight at night without a waiver for 107 pilots. So we don't want to recommend restricting something that's a right,
they're already looking
a privilege, privilege that's going to be granted.
Right. Let's see.
I think there's a different. I mean, I agree. I don't. I like the footage too. I don't know where the line needs to be drawn between the 107 pilots and the non-107 pilots in terms of what they're going to allow, and the FAA is probably going to make that determination. I don't know how much say in that we're going to have.
Well, and that's why we're here, is to kind of come up with some ideas of what we as a community should stand for, and what we think is right and what we think is wrong. I mean, any type of restriction of flight is going to be looked at as rough, and it's going to be looked at as they're trying to kick us out of the sky. But I think at the same time, with a little bit of common sense, that we can come up with some solutions that make sense to the entire community, such as not flying over any large gathering of people, and in terms of proving that we as a community are safe and we're geared towards safety, and definitely ready to take the next step and maybe gain some rights that we may have lost by kind of making some concessions. And I'm not saying give away the world here, but I'm just kind of curious, where you feel that where you would feel that you were safe to fly, versus where you feel that you were not safe to fly. And keep in mind, we fly highly complex machines, and things can go wrong and do go wrong, and how we would be ready to kind of mitigate that risk, so that we don't hurt people. So as an example, the FPVFC safety guidelines kind of address some of this. Let me pull that up, that particular one. My internet seems to not be functioning at the moment.
We certainly could think about it from equipment perspectives and about the size, or the category rather, that the FAA is putting forward of category 1 of less than 0.55 pounds or 250 grams. That's one type of equipment we could say, gosh, we would like no restrictions on this. It's small enough not to cause grave bodily or property damage.
That's definitely one criteria, yeah.
I guess I look at my newbie drones as a pretty inert thing to fly. I mean, I fly them in the house around family and pets and things like that. They got prop guards. They're very small. I have a different level of comfortability there than I would, flying a 5-inch over a crowd of people, and then, have some sort of a mechanical issue or something like that, and have that thing come down. I mean, obviously it's significantly heavier. Can do the math calculations.
You got props spinning that are a good size and have a good amount of momentum by themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like spinning. I always look at them like spinning blades, literally blades. And I wouldn't stick my finger in there, and so I sure don't want to be responsible for flinging that at somebody at speed. So for me, that's where I draw the line.
It's funny. So just a couple of experiences that I've had. So I have this really high powered, it's probably close to a 200-mile-an-hour drone, and it uses carbon fiber props, because the props just spin so fast that anything less than will just rip themselves apart. And
what he meant to say was 99 miles an hour. I'm sure you didn't mean 200.
I'm absolutely certain I didn't hear that. Yeah.
That's right.
So, like many people out there, I was working on it and forgot to take the propellers off on the workbench, and it jumped and it bit me, and literally scarred my hand. I've got scars, like literally like jagged marks on my fingers from where this thing bit me, and it was pretty bad. And then just this last weekend, I was flying with one of my friends, and I have a drone that I designed myself, and it's kind of pointy. So I don't know if you guys have seen the Shin drone. I think it's the Shrieker, that's got the sharp points on the ends of the arm, and it looks almost like a throwing star. It's a little 3-inch. This is similar to that, and it was funny because I wasn't close to us, but I was kind of coming back towards us, and my friend was legitimately scared, and he flies quads. He was legitimately scared of my quad because it had pointy ends on the arms, and he like absolutely drew the line. He's like, "Don't even get it near me." And so it was pretty an interesting situation that even somebody who flies FPV, who flies freestyle, who likes to race, was genuinely scared of the quad I was flying. And even though he knows that my builds are that 9 times out of 10 nothing's going to go wrong, nothing has gone wrong, but that it actually caused him a little bit of physical anxiety that this quad was flying, in the general area. So different situations like that. I think part of it is the design, and part of it's going to be the weight. And those are good ideas to categorize some of this stuff. I mean, you got to keep in mind that while I feel like some of the way that the FAA has categorized the 107 in RPMs in terms of the categories, that they might be a little off, it's still a brick with spinning blades on it. I mean, it legitimately is, and I challenge anybody to say that it's not. And until people are comfortable with these, and we're going to continue to have these types of issues.
Yeah, and I think shrouded props are absolutely they're in our future. I mean, it's in the rule proposals, and that's going to be a fact. So I'm trying to think of their other. I took us off the mark a bit on talking about equipment.
No, that's fine.
And we were
so
on
the just to kind of swing us back. So this is an excerpt from the FPVFC safety guidelines, and I'm going to post it here in the chat. So no FPV flight operation should take place in an area or manner that disrupts or poses a danger to any of the following: emergency response efforts, to include law enforcement actions, fire response actions, military actions, unless the operator is actively engaged in the operation with proper clearance from the authorities; areas where crowds of people gather, to include sporting, musical, or political events; and civil infrastructure, to include power, water, and transportation facilities. Is there more that should be added to that? Should we be? I mean, some of the ideas that we were coming up with kind of directly reflect in this safety guideline. Is there more that should be added to that? Is there? Is it too much? I mean,
one thing that I was thinking about is super sensitive wildlife areas. I'm not sure how to define exactly what those are, but some places really should be off limits.
Well, I know there are some areas where I'm trying to remember what they're called. They're
animal preserves or sanctuaries.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Animal preserves. Maybe that's definitely one that we should be adding. I do know that a lot of national parks are off limits, and some state parks and whatnot. But okay, wildlife preserves. That's
and
definitely
some of that
a good
seems
idea.
a little too broad, just saying all of those parks, but specific places, for sure.
Okay.
I think there are some wildlife refuges, or whatever you want to call that are actually listed, and there's even an altitude restriction for general aviation
Interesting.
on those.
Yeah, you're right. I saw that in some of the Part 107 course material.
Yeah, I saw it in I saw it in looking at the maps, reviewing for that exam, and I wasn't aware of it, but it's there.
Well, in that Lance webinar that we were on, Dan, didn't they say that national parks manned aircraft have to stay? I think it's 1,000 feet or more, right?
Yeah, it was something like that. And I know every time that the Minnesota one brings up the Minneapolis and St. Paul airports, you can see on the map how the Minnesota River in that area has some wildlife areas that have altitude limits and no-fly zones.
Okay. So, I mean, I get that. Let's see. There are times where I feel like, national parks is a little bit broad. But at the same time, they have to define something, right? So, I mean, so I live in Arizona, for those of you who don't know, and being able to go to the Grand Canyon, this amazing structure that takes up the entire landscape, and not being able to fly in that area is kind of frustrating. But at the same time, I do get it. We've got all these amazing landscapes all across the United States, and a lot of them are locked into national parks. And for those of us who, like me, I fly to see a different perspective, to get that feeling of flying over amazing things, and to have all that locked away, for me, is frustrating. I don't know how anybody else feels about it.
I would agree with you there. There's places I would like to be able to fly, especially if I was able to go visit visit someplace and uh, want to be able to fly there and not be able to. To me, is somewhat, I think, is pushing the boundaries. I think obviously common sense, again, but that's so difficult. I think sometimes laws and rules get made because you know um, we the many who some thought before we fly, our privilege gets affected by those the few who don't, um, and so then a rule gets made. You know, I
Yeah,
mean,
I get.
have any of you ever worked at a company that has a 400-page employee manual? And if you talk to somebody that's been there for 15 years, they can give you the person's name that caused that particular regulation.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I worked at a place like that, not for long, but I mean that's so. I mean, I think that's sometimes how rules get made, literally, that affect all of us. It's frustrating, but it happens.
Absolutely. So here's another question for you guys. Should private citizens and companies be able to apply for a no-fly zone status? And
No.
That's a good question.
because I know a couple years back, this was probably like 2012, 2013, there was a company that was going around allowing people to apply for, uh, it was a startup, and they were allowing people to put their house on a map of no-fly zones for drones. And that company, from all the research I've done, is no longer around, but it kind of begs the question, should a private citizen or a company be able to say that, or apply to the FAA and say, this area around my business or this area around my home, I want it designated as a no-fly zone?
I believe a lot of people and companies already believe that that's the case, that they do own that airspace and that it's not allowed if you don't ask them, which we know is not true.
I think the Supreme Court has actually ruled on that a couple of times. And I know that I've read it, and it would take me a little bit of time to find it. And my internet here, especially at this time of night, is kind of sketchy to let me go do that at the same time. But I know that they've ruled on that, where people have said, I want the air traffic, diverted because the noise is bothering me.
So
And
there was one, and this, I believe it's Cosby versus the United States. Yes. Let me pull this up. So this was in 1946. Just pulling this up from Wikipedia real quick. I'll give a quick read. So Cosby was the owner of a chicken farm that was located less than half a mile from the end of a runway of Lindley Field. Yeah, chicken farmer, in Greensboro, North Carolina. During World War II, the United States military flew planes into the airstrip as low as 83 feet above Cosby's farm. The low-flying military aircraft interfered with Cosby's chicken farm. He lost 150 chickens and had to stop farming. The government claimed a right to use the airspace, and Cosby sued the government for compensation under Fifth Amendment's takings clause. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. Under common law, a person who owns the soil also owns the space indefinitely upward. In defense, the U.S. Referenced the 1926 Air Commerce Act, in which the U.S. government claimed to possess all airspace. An appellate court ruled that the landowner's domain includes the airspace above it, and ruled that Cosby was entitled to just compensation for the government having taken his property by allowing overflights through airspace above his property. The United States appealed this ruling against him, and the Supreme Court agreed to review the case regarding the contradiction between common laws of property ownership against the assertion of a federal claim to possess all airspace above the United States down to ground level. And it goes on, but it does talk about this. Let's see. The court needed to determine the value owned. Court does not need to compensate the farmer for use below 83 feet because the planes did not fly below that height. So we've got a couple. That's an old case, and that gets cited a lot when you start talking about airspace claims. I do know that in a court case, I think it was in 2012, the U.S. it wasn't a Supreme Court, but it was a court did dictate that the FAA has jurisdiction over any type of flying in the national airspace, whether it be a kite, an airplane, a model aircraft, a balloon, a rocket, any of those items. But it's just interesting, these different cases that kind of contradict, but again, a lot of these are old cases, and since then the FAA has claimed dominion over all the air from ground level on up. And so, but they do also have the power to make no-fly zones. So obviously, if no-fly zones, if a private citizen or a company is capable of dictating that their area is a no-fly zone, what should be the reason behind it? What are the requirements that someone would be able to do that?
I don't think that private citizens have that ability. Obviously there are government entities for reasons of security, reasons of safety, that make sense to be able to either temporarily or permanently declare an area a no-fly zone. But for my neighbor to say, the airspace over my house, over his house, is a place that's closed to air traffic, well, I think, I'm going to have a problem with it. And what gives that person that right? And then how, that's kind of a slippery slope. So now I own the airspace. So, can you now prevent, law enforcement from serving a warrant on your property because you claim that the driveway, which is deemed actually public access, somebody can't come down your driveway or walk up your driveway to make a delivery, or in the case of law enforcement. And this has been something I spent over 25 years in EMS, and this was something that was actually came up in a situation that the details with are just irrelevant here, but it was a similar situation. Okay, we want to we don't want the ambulance coming down this privately owned road, which accesses 6 different addresses.
Yeah, I can see some of the problems with that, that's for sure.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, so you're denying other people access. Well,
right.
This is so it's kind of the same thing. You can't. So how high can they go then? I mean, can they prevent an airliner from flying overhead too? at 20,000 feet, or somebody who lives near an airport, can you say, "Wow, hey, you know what? I don't want you to fly over my property here.
Right.
I own this 20 acres, and my business is on it, and I don't want the airplanes to come over here." So what is air traffic gonna, are they, do they have to deviate traffic around you?
Right.
I just think
Well,
I don't think that's gonna happen.
yeah. So Sec 3 has a question. How do no trespassing signs work? People randomly put those up. So, um, as a homeowner, I have a property line, and I have the right to basically say that there's no trespassing on my property. I actually own the land beneath my home. You know, that is part of land ownership, and homeowner. That's part of the deed you sign, and the all the paperwork you sign when you buy a home, or even when you buy a business. The plot of land that your business is on, if you bought that land, then you own it. So it's similar to how some cities and states are basically declaring drones off limits to fly. They can't claim that you can't fly over the area that they're claiming is off limits, but they can dictate that you cannot land and take off from that particular plot of land. So that's how some states and cities and towns are getting past that kind of stuff. But does that make sense on how trespassing works? You can't trespass with an aircraft unless the FAA says that you can't fly there.
How about a pathologic case of would we consider a zone to be, or other conditions like not in conjunction with the use of firearms on the ground? And so I live in upstate New York, and this is Hunter Haven. So I'm very unusual in that my home does not resemble a munitions dump. Um, and so, and when first day of hunting around here, deer hunting, is the high school empties out. So I mean, it really is an avid part or a huge part of pastimes around here. So I'm just waiting for people to figure out, if I could see that deer from a drone, I could go after it. And is that, is a condition like that something that we'd want to add into something that is a geographic statement of a zone?
I think if you check your Department of Natural Resources law there for hunting, if it's similar to other states. So I'm in Wisconsin. We have, I can speak to exactly what we have here. Um, it's the same thing here. I mean, deer hunting is like it's just
Part of
common.
life.
And
Mhm.
yeah, and I'm in a rural area, so this is an area you can hunt in, but somebody can't shoot within 200 feet of my home, nor can they shoot in the direction of my home.
Yeah,
So even if
you're breaking up, but yeah, I'm in a very rural area, but it's a similar thing where you cannot discharge a firearm within 500 feet of a home, up here in upstate New York.
right, so if somebody, even if somebody spotted an animal on my property, they can't shoot it on my property. They can't pursue it. And also in Wisconsin, and I don't know um, about other areas, you cannot pursue game with any kind of an aircraft.
Hmm.
So I mean, there's usually there's
I think,
usually laws here for that, and I know there are in Wisconsin.
yeah,
And I see somebody posting from Minnesota, and I know it is there, and I know it is in Illinois because
yeah.
those are the neighboring states to me here.
And
So
here in New York, we pride ourselves on more laws than any other state. So I'd bet money that it's on the books in New York as well.
You in California, right?
That's it. That's it. Overtaxed and overlawed.
You can't
So,
even think in California, can you?
so I think, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think in the game and wildlife laws in almost all states, if not all states, I believe that's kind of the case where you can't use a drone in conjunction with hunting. Um, so I think there are even some areas where like game cameras and stuff are not allowed. I think a lot of it um, is predicated on number one scaring the animals, but on the same token, it's not good sportsmanship. And if there's one thing that I know from hunters that I've interacted with, a lot of them are big on just being good sportsmen. You know, if you have to walk 10 miles to go track a deer, that's what you're going to do. And I think a lot of places that would just be frowned on by their own hunting community. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
So, okay, so here's another kind of uh, caveat I'm going to throw out there in terms of private companies being able to apply for no-fly zone status. So, think about private companies that may be engaged in development of um, defense contract items, like confidential kind of stuff. Would you feel better about them being allowed to make that a no-fly zone, or same deal as everybody else?
You know, that's an interesting one. Having lived in the Detroit metro area, they both GM and Ford had tracks that they built and tested prototypes, and they were very jumpy about small manned aircraft flying around or near their proving grounds. So that's a so not national security, but boy, it sure is billions of dollars on the line.
Absolutely.
I normally think of spying with using like the camera drones, but if you were trying to get a good shot of a prototype car, you might be trying to use an FPV drone to get in there really quick and fast and chase them around. So maybe that's relevant to FPV.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have a Nissan track that's not too far from where I live. Um, that I thought, I've had thoughts about going out there, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I don't think they're gonna take too kindly to that. And not that I'm gonna be stealing their ideas, because God knows I don't want to get into car engineering. But it's just interesting how the companies, they do develop confidential, develop technologies and products that they want to maintain confidentiality on. But at what point do you draw the line? Is it when it's in the best interest of national security in terms of defense contractors? Is it I mean, there are a lot of corporations and companies that operate in regular buildings in their town that you know
I think the AMA might take a line that would say they're completely comfortable with flying over any private facility as long as the purpose is safe recreational flight. But as soon as we cross into, well, if it has anything to do with corporate espionage, surveillance, peeping Tom type of problems, that's not recreation, and they would frown on it. So maybe that's a line to take, is that we would say for recreation purposes, and we could even stipulate that that would exclude surveillance or taking um, photos or videos for commercial purposes.
so you basically boil it down to the intent of the flight.
Yeah, I like that. Just yeah, what you said, Dave.
Good luck
Yeah.
proving intent.
Yes, yes.
I like that. I definitely like that. That's a good way to think about it. All right. Let's see here.
And with the intent thing, in some ways, that's how the Part 107 stuff works. If your intent is to further a business, then you need to have a Part 107. And if your intent is to fly as a hobbyist, that's different.
Absolutely.
Right.
All right. Let's see. So I'm noticing just through talking through this, Dave, that we've got a couple of holes in our safety guideline here that we probably need to tackle.
Yeah, good discussion.
So I think that's about all I have, honestly, this week. Dave, do you have anything you want to cover?
Well, I'll just briefly mention this is a small enough group, and we sincerely appreciate the participation. In order for us to be a community-based organization, we have to be incorporated, and we have to have the IRS approval to be a 501c3 or nonprofit organization. And we, as of yesterday, we just got both of those, so we're official. And so we'll be making a more formal announcement about that. But as I say, we all sincerely appreciate the participation on these calls, and wanted to make that visible.
And that also means that the FPVFC can take donations, and you can use those on your taxes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Those are good things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and we try hard not to fill this time with the minutia behind the running FPVFC. So feel free to shut me up anytime if I go off on the details of how we're running the business. We want to be transparent, but we also don't want to bore folks to tears on that stuff.
True story. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, guys, that not everybody gets to see. But Dave and I were talking the other day when we finally got our approval, and the analogy I made was feels like the parking brake's been taken off. And so I know I'm excited. I know he's excited. Everybody involved is really excited that we finally got our approval. So over the next couple of weeks, there's going to be a lot of, hopefully, a lot of action happening, website launching. There's going to be just a lot of things. So I hope you guys kind of appreciate some of the work we put in, and as we kind of take it into a much more public realm, that you guys like what you see and feel like you want to support us. So
and speak up. We're doing this for the community, so this really, I mean, it's absolutely critical that we continue to listen.
So one thing I want to ask you guys is one thing that we really need is a little more participation in these town hall meetings. In some cases, it's good that they're small because people get to talk as much as they like and give all the opinions they like. But at the same time, we want to reach more people. So I humbly request that you talk to your friends that fly FPV and get them to join us on our meetings. We are holding them every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And obviously, the more people, the more opinions, the more of a swath of the community that we can account for. And by doing so, I think it really helps us see what the community's thoughts are, see what, and not to sound too grandiose, but what the United States pilots think and what's on their mind, and it helps us kind of be coherent with the community. So do me a favor, tell a friend, have them tell a friend, have them join in. If there's a time that better works for people, I'd like to know that. I'm open to suggestions on that. I think we all are. And if this works, fantastic. This time works well for me. It works well for pretty much everybody. But if there's a better time, I want to know about it. And please, please, please bring your friends, have them join in. There is not a suggestion, there's not an opinion that will get ignored. it's my personal belief, and it's the belief of the FPVFC, and the community is really important to us.
That's good. It's good to hear. I've been following this since the beginning. This time is historically been kind of challenging for me to get in and participate. This week worked out really well, and I was able to do that, and hopefully I'll be able to make some take care of a family situation that just kind of precludes me sometimes from this particular time. But that's my problem on my end. I was wondering um, uh, if we could go back, if people wouldn't mind if we went back. I just have some comments about the knowledge test things that were discussed last week, and I apologize for not participating then. Again, it's sometimes family has to come first, and it's just one of those things.
Yeah, feel free. Comments are welcome, bud.
Okay. So just real quickly about me, I've been, as I said earlier, I've been a paramedic for a long time. I was also a paramedic educator. I've taught amateur radio classes. I've taught, EMS, CPR, and about 27 other different types of emergency medicine certifications. I've also been a licensing examiner, both for amateur radio and for EMS and the American Heart Association, and a bunch of other things. So I've had a lot of exposure to writing tests, question pools, and when I listened to the discussion last week, as some of the things were brought up, it kind of concerned me. I think everyone's. I think I don't want anybody to take it wrong. I think everybody's heart's in the right place, but from a testing aspect, to cover the areas that the list encompassed, that exam would be bigger than the Part 107 exam. Just with what you had there.
I see where you're coming from.
So I think, I guess to me, I think in looking and listening to everything that I can from the FAA, I think their biggest concern in the non-commercial zone, in the hobbyist zone, is safety. And I think that's really where we need to focus: rules and safety. And I think we have to leave the teaching aspect, the how to wire your drone, how to troubleshoot, and that sort of thing. We have to leave that to the educators, who can address that. And the community has some great people. I mean, I learned totally how to do this, off of YouTube videos, and did I make some mistakes? Yep, but I got all my fingers yet. And I think, I guess I just wanted to put that out there. I think that, again, everybody had great ideas about stuff that we'd like people to know, but I don't know that we can include all of that in a test that people are going to want to take.
Okay, fair enough.
That's great. That's great feedback.
Absolutely.
When you said safety, I was expecting you to say safety and security, but you left security out?
Security from?
Security of the national airspace. And so the FAA maintains that they have a dual mandate: one, safety, and two, security. And we see a lot of Homeland Security flavors being pushed on the FAA for improved security in the regulations.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I just looked at I looked at the FAA site, and I think you can pull their big concerns off of there. So,
I like the single focus of safety. I think that's a great comment.
Absolutely,
Yeah, and
it sure
Also,
is.
I think
to keep things, keep it simple.
Simple.
Keep it focused.
Yeah, and I and and if I'd have been smart here and been a prepared teacher, I would have had my list in my hand, which includes the airspace restrictions. Controlled airspace knowledge is something that they're obviously concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
They talk a lot about using before you fly, or one of the other apps. I know there's other out there that's there, so I think that shows up in their literature more. No drone zone is another thing that they talk about, and I'll be honest, I haven't looked at that one because I've got a couple of those apps on my phone and I just use those. But um, I think if we focus on addressing their concerns, it's the exam is going to make them happy, and it's still going to be something that's very manageable to administer
Mm-hmm.
and very sellable to people in the hobby.
To the community, yeah, where it's not a 600 question tome.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Awesome. That's
Thank you for
excellent
bringing it up.
feedback. Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent feedback. I do appreciate that.
So the other thing I'll throw out there, and then I'll shut up because I've been talking. But
You're fine.
I can tend to talk too much, so never say. Be afraid to say, "Dean, be quiet." Oh, that's my name doesn't even show up on this thing. Sorry. Anyway, so I lost my train of thought.
It'll come back.
Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. I'm getting old.
Yeah. You're in good company.
Yeah. I mean,
So is
when
it
that thought just goes.
so is it a general license or do you have an extra?
My amateur?
Yeah.
I actually have an advanced when they had that.
Excellent.
So it's old.
You are
I'm
old.
30. I am old. Yeah. My grandfather taught me to. He built all his own stuff, so that's kind of how I grew up, sitting next to him and Heathkit stuff.
Yep.
And I have those memories. And that was a really long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
I've been licensed for over 30 years myself.
Excellent.
That's okay. Our kids will be thinking the same thing. Oh, my dad used to solder up them drones and
Exactly. And they were made of carbon fiber, no titanium. Yeah. Right.
Meanwhile, they're all dealing with anti-gravity engines, and oh god, can you imagine?
Yeah. I don't even want to think about it.
Here's the deal,
it didn't come back. We're trying to give you that that pause so that the thought would come back.
Yeah, sometimes when it goes, I'll be honest, it just goes.
It goes okay.
Here's the deal. Your name's Dean, right?
Yeah.
All right. Here's the deal, Dean. My name's Josh. If it does come back to you, feel free to message me or Dave or both of us or Dan or any of us.
Absolutely.
And let us know, because the feedback box is never closed. In fact, in the chat in the Discord channel, I did probably last week or the week before, I created a channel called the suggestion box. And that is there for anybody who has a suggestion, a thought, an idea, to drop stuff in there, and nothing will get unread. Everything will be read by one of us, and will be addressed in one way or another. And I want free suggestions from all. And keep in mind, this is a community based organization. It doesn't exist without the community. And in that token, feedback is free. It's free flowing, and everything will be responded to. So please feel free to drop it in there or hit us up personally. There's usually always somebody on that can answer your question or talk to you about your suggestion or your thoughts or anything like that. So that does exist for a reason, and I want it to be used. So that's there. We are a resource as well, and we would be glad to have that feedback. We're always happy for feedback. You have no idea. That's why we do these town hall meetings, is for feedback. What we're doing, where we're going, what's coming. So it's definitely a big part of this for me.
That's great. So it came back,
Woohoo!
which is surprising. That was pretty quick for me. So the thing I wanted to add is I'm not just the guy who's going to come up with something and then not offer to help fix it. So or help work on it. So I have had some experience writing a few exams that students have either liked or hated, depending on how well they did with them. It's amazing how you can go from the like professor to the hated guy. So I've got great stories about that for another day. But I would offer to help, write question pools and like all EMS exams. Those are question pools that are created from multiple contributors, and then edited as kind of as a pool, and then added and and that sort of thing. So I think more people we can get involved in that. I think we come up with an exam, and test questions are really difficult to write.
Yes,
and
they are.
good questions.
Yes.
Anyway, anybody can write crappy ones, but good ones are hard to write, and so writing them, putting them out there, letting other people do them, look at them and give feedback is a good way. And I still do that today. I edit.
Awesome. Thank you for the
edit
offer.
textbooks and exams.
So here's the deal, Dean. I will shoot you a direct message here after the call, and you and I can kind of work on that, and I think that would be awesome. And then we can kind of bring that back to the community and say, what do you think? So I'll shoot you a DM after the call here, and we can kind of take it a step at a time, and we'll start tackling that.
Cool.
Excellent. Thank you for the offer of help. We
Yep.
very appreciate it.
All right. Anybody else have anything before we wrap it up? We have just hit. Okay, so 7:00 my time, 10 p.m. Eastern time.
9 o'clock here. As you can tell by the alarm, right?
There you go. All right. If anybody has anything, now's the time. If we're good, next week's topic for the town hall meeting, we're going to go over our safety guidelines, the FPVFC safety guidelines, as well as the ability to help first responders. And that's going to be a pretty bulky topic, I imagine. So those are going to be kind of our topics for next week, and hopefully all you guys can jump in, join us, contribute, and give excellent feedback.
Very good.
Sounds
great.
great.
Great discussion.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good night, guys.
Take care.
Bye.